And then I will allow you to introduce yourself and
Okay.
get started. And that's great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the webinar today. I will be covering two topics, one, the coronavirus and pandemic-related scams, and also identity theft. Oh, I'm having trouble changing slides. Oh, there we go. First, a little bit of background. My name is Purba Mukerjee, and I'm an attorney in the Federal Trade Commission's Midwest Region office in Chicago. The FTC is thrilled to be partnering today with the Clinton Public Library to bring you this webinar on COVID scams and identity theft. And thanks so much to Ashley and the library for organizing. For those of you who may not be familiar with the FTC, we are the nation's consumer protection agency. So our mission is to combat deceptive and unfair practices in the marketplace, and we do that through both enforcement and education. My office is one of 8 regional offices throughout that the FTC has throughout the US. We're based in Chicago, and our office covers 11 states in the Midwest, all the way from Kentucky to the Dakotas. So turning now to coronavirus scams, one thing we know from all health emergencies and natural disasters we've seen in the past is that scammers follow the headlines. And they take advantage of what they might be seeing in the news to find new ways to get consumers to give them their money or personal financial information. And of course, the coronavirus pandemic is no exception. We saw pretty quickly that scammers were going to use the health crisis to play on consumers' fears to perpetrate a whole slew of both their old traditional scams and also new scams. Some of the scams that we've been seeing are listed on this slide. And of course, scammers have adjusted their tactics over time as the pandemic has evolved and the news stories have changed. So in the beginning, we saw a lot of online scams related to in-demand items at the beginning of the pandemic, like masks and toilet paper, gloves, hand sanitizer. And then, when the government stimulus checks started coming out, the scams were focused on those. And now, more recently, we're seeing scams related to the rollout of vaccines. So now I want to talk a little bit about the FTC's Consumer Sentinel Network, which is a complaint database, and what it shows about pandemic-related fraud. The FTC maintains, we have a national database of consumer fraud and identity theft complaints, and that's called Consumer Sentinel. That database includes complaints that are submitted both directly to the FTC and to other agencies like state attorneys general, and Better Business Bureau and other agencies. All those agencies share their complaints with the FTC, so the FTC aggregates them all, and that makes the Consumer Sentinel a one-stop shop of fraud and identity theft complaints that's accessible to law enforcers in, for example, Indiana, and then all across the US. Since the start of the pandemic, the FTC has been posting on a daily basis the pandemic-related complaints that we're receiving. So those are available at the website shown on this slide. So it's ftc.gov/explore data. That website has both national complaint numbers and top complaint categories. So you'll see those. The overall reports is on this slide is 404,273. And you can also get state-specific information by clicking on the state that you're interested in. So this slide was prepared on March 25th, so last Thursday. And as of that day, as I mentioned, the Consumer Sentinel had received over 400,000 reports about COVID-related scams nationally. And those complaints correspond to roughly $384 million in losses. The top 2 complaint categories, which you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, are online shopping and travel related fraud. So those are mainly travel and events that have been canceled during the pandemic and refunds haven't been provided. And if you were interested and you wanted to click, so if you're on this website, you would click the state of Indiana and you would see the Indiana specific data. And there, if you were to click on it, you would see that we've received over 5,000 reports of COVID related scams from consumers in your state. And again, the top 2 categories are online shopping and travel related. In terms of the online shopping frauds, I'm sure most of you know that at the start of the pandemic, there were a whole bunch of websites that emerged offering products that were in demand at the start, like the toilet paper, hand sanitizer that I mentioned before. And most of these websites were run by operations outside the US, so who set up the site, took consumers' money, and then didn't deliver the product. So in July, the FTC issued what we call a data spotlight to bring attention to this problem. We reported in that spotlight that in April and May of last year, in 2020, more people reported problems with online shopping than in any other months on record. And more than half of those complaints indicate that people never got what they had ordered. And again, those complaints were related to things that were in demand at the start of the pandemic, like face masks and hand sanitizer. But there were also complaints about failure to deliver everything from clothes to electronics to even puppies that people had tried to buy online. So scammers often used pandemic-related excuses for failure to deliver, or citing shipping delays, or even charging extra fees due to the pandemic. Invariably, they would stop responding to complaints from consumers, and they would just never deliver the products. Because these operations were largely offshore, the most law enforcement could do was to try and get the entities to take their sites down before they could victimize more consumers. But online shopping scams have been a real problem during the pandemic because, as you're aware, people have had to turn more to buying things online. So I want to mention that the FTC recently launched a website where people can report fraud, which is this site, reportfraud.ftc.gov. And reporting fraud is really important, especially during the pandemic. It makes it easier for people to share their experiences, and it also makes issues like the failure to deliver issues I was talking about in the last slide get onto the radar of the relevant agencies and for law enforcement. So once someone tells us what's happened to them at the news site, they'll also get advice on what they can do to recover, including what to do in order to get their money back, as well as tips on how to avoid situations like that in future. So we strongly encourage people to visit this site and report issues. So now I want to turn to some of the scams that we've been seeing during the pandemic. The first are fake treatments and cures, everything from prevention claims to miracle cures and home testing kits targeting people on Medicare. Since the start of the pandemic, scammers have been hawking bogus products to prevent, treat, or cure the coronavirus, or even offer a vaccine. And that was even before there was even an FDA emergency approval for any vaccine. People were getting these pitches by online in text messages and email and on social media like Facebook. And people on Medicare were getting calls and emails claiming to give them special access to testing kits or treatments. Our message and reminder to consumer has been this: you're not going to hear for the first time about a medical breakthrough for COVID-19 text message or an email or on Facebook. And Medicare representatives are never going to call offering individuals special access or putting them first in line for test or treatment. Anyone who represents that they're acting on behalf of Medicare and that's what they're doing is probably a scammer. So what has the FTC been doing about these fake treatment and cure claims? An important part of our work during normal times is targeting companies that make foundationless claims without any sort of scientific proof to back them up. And a regular part of our false advertising work is, this is a regular part of our false advertising work, and it's received a heightened importance during the pandemic. Since March, our attorneys and investigators have been working closely with the Food and Drug Administration to find companies who are peddling fake cures, treatments, and prevention products. Together with the FDA, we've sent warning letters to a number of companies, and those letters give them 48 hours to report back on how they'll address the concerns we raise in the letter. The warning letters relate to COVID treatment and cure claims from everything from teas to essential oils to ozone therapies or stem cell treatments or even high doses of vitamin C. Once we send those letters, we then watch to make sure that the claims are removed. So we look on social media, we check online marketplaces, and we track complaints to the FTC to make sure that they've really cut it out. We're happy to report that the response to the warning letters has been really good. The companies have adjusted their advertising to remove the claims that we were concerned about, or they've stopped selling the products altogether. All told, we've sent more than 330 warning letters during the pandemic to companies making false cure, treatment, or prevention claims. And for those few companies that haven't stopped after our warning letter, we've followed up with federal lawsuits. Another thing that we've seen is that scammers have been sending email and they've been sending emails and text messages trying to get personal information, money, or load malware onto computer or other devices. This slide shows an example of a fake World Health Organization email about COVID that would put malware on your computer if you clicked that big blue button that's labeled safety measures. We've seen that scammers have also bought up a bunch of website names that include the word coronavirus in it, including misspellings of coronavirus. But if you visit one of those sites, they'll likely put malware on your device. The same thing is true about fake messages from companies like FedEx and Amazon that seem to relate to package delivery, which of course people are relying on more heavily during the pandemic. So even if an email looks like it's from a company that you know, like FedEx or Amazon, make sure you look carefully at the email, including like the sending address, to make sure it's legitimate and not an imposter. That it could be something so small as just a misspelling in how FedEx is written that might tip you off that it's not truly what it looks like it is. And so the message for consumers confronting these emails and text messages is the same as it always has been, just not to click on the links in the emails or the text messages when they come from sources you don't know. That's, of course, a common consumer education message, but it's really important now during the pandemic. And because it's hard to kind of detect because scammers have become more sophisticated at kind of covering up their email addresses and making their kind of spammy text messages and emails look more legitimate, it's a good idea to make sure you have anti-malware or antivirus software on your computer or devices, and that that software is up to date. Now let's talk about robocalls. So scammers were quick to adjust to their robocalls to try and take advantage of people's fears during the pandemic. So again, offering fake cures, prevention solutions, test kits, special access for Medicare recipients, stuff we've already talked about. But they've also tailored their robocall scams. So we've seen calls pretending to be from the Social Security Administration that now reference the coronavirus. They're telling consumers that that their Social Security number has been suspended due to suspicious activity during the pandemic. We've also seen mortgage and student loan debt relief robocalls that mention kind of the federal COVID relief that was passed last spring and more recently. And then the same thing with robocalls purporting to offer health insurance. Although some of these scams have adjusted their message to the pandemic, through last spring and summer, we did see a pretty significant drop in the reports of telemarketing robocalls. That's partially due to partially due to the stay-at-home orders in the US and in countries like India, where these calls typically originate. But the numbers are climbing again as the stay-at-home orders have been lifted. So our advice for consumers is to simply hang up on illegal robocalls, then block the number that appeared on caller ID using whatever blocking system you have on your phone or whatever's provided by your carrier. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, it's really helpful if you report the call at reportfraud.ftc.gov. On the law enforcement side, we've also taken steps during the pandemic to tackle illegal coronavirus robocalls. Since the pandemic began, FTC staff has we've sent 15 letters to companies that help scammy telemarketers, and we've warned those companies about the penalties for doing that. These companies are providers of voice over internet protocol, or VoIP. That's the VoIP companies. They transmit the illegal robocalls or carry them for telemarketers. Some of the letters that we sent were jointly from the FTC and another agency, the Federal Communications Commission. They were sent to companies who we knew had transmitted robocalls offering fraudulent COVID-19 home testing kits or claiming that HVAC services could help prevent the spread of the virus. These letters gave the companies, like those other letters I mentioned before, they got 48 hours to stop doing what they were doing. So here, stop transmitting calls. And if they didn't, the FTC would authorize, or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, would authorize providers to block all calls from those companies. So that's another way that FTC, coordinating with our partners, have been disrupting robocallers who are trying to take advantage of people during the pandemic. Here is another headline that scammers have definitely been following, government stimulus checks. So the news last spring and then again recently that economic impact payments or stimulus checks were being sent to qualifying consumers. Criminals use that type of information to get people's money or their personal information. After the first stimulus program was announced last spring, people were getting calls or emails out of the blue claiming their payment was available, but first they had to make an upfront payment or provide some personal or financial information to get that money. So it's important to remember that the government won't ask you to pay to get these stimulus checks, nor will they call and ask for sensitive information like your bank account or your social security number. We also heard from consumers last spring who had received a text message indicating that their government stimulus check was ready and asking for them to click a link for more information. Again, that was a scam and probably a way to load malware onto consumers' devices. And just a couple weeks ago, we issued an alert after getting reports that consumers were receiving emails that appeared to be from the FTC's chairman, indicating that the recipient was entitled to coronavirus relief money. The email even included a fake certificate that was purportedly signed by someone with the FTC. But consumers who followed up later were first told that they had to pay taxes before getting their money. And then even if they did do that, they of course never got the money that they were promised. So again, the same message for consumers is that they should ignore anyone who calls, texts, or emails to, quote, help you get money from the government. On the topic of stimulus payments, I wanted to bring attention to a blog post that the FTC issued last May. We were getting reports from a number of state attorneys general that some nursing homes and assisted living facilities were telling patients who were on Medicaid that they needed to sign over their stimulus payments to the facility. We heard this from a number of states here in the Midwest, and it's totally wrong. Under the CARES Act, the stimulus payment is treated like a tax credit. And for that reason, it's not considered a resource for the purpose of federal government programs like Medicaid. So the nursing home or other facility can't just seize the payment simply because a resident is on Medicaid. So we've encouraged people who've encountered that issue to alert their state attorney general. As we know, a number of those offices are working hard to get money back for people if the nursing home grabbed it. And now, in the more recent stage of the pandemic, as COVID vaccines are being distributed across the country, we've been warning people about scams that inevitably have followed the rollout. So here's what people need to know about vaccine-related scams. These are some critical points to be aware of. One is that you likely won't need to pay anything out of pocket to get a vaccine. Two, you can't pay to put your name on a list to get the vaccine. You can't pay to get early access to the vaccine. And no one from a vaccine distribution site or healthcare provider or a private insurance company will ask for your social security number, your credit card number, or your bank account information to get you to sign up or to get you the vaccine. So beware of providers offering products, treatments, medicines that will prevent the virus. Make sure you always check with your healthcare provider before paying or receiving any COVID-19 related treatment. The big takeaway is that if you get a call, a text, or an email, or even someone knocking at your door claiming to get you early access to vaccine, that's probably a scam. Don't pay for a promise of vaccine access or share personal information. And remember, again, to report to the FTC at reportfraud.ftc.gov. So we've discussed some of the new tactics that scammers have used during the pandemic, but of course, they're still relying on methods that they were using before. And I'm going to cover some of those now. One is imposter scams. So pretending to be someone that people trust is what scammers do. They may claim to be a well-known company or a family member, but data from FTC's Consumer Sentinel network suggests that one of the most reliable scams for fraudsters to use is pretending to be the government. And whatever the pitch, they all have one thing in common. Their goal is to get money or to get personal information from consumers. So in the world of government imposter scams, there are Medicare scams. So scammers might call to offer things like a COVID-19 kit or a coronavirus package or Medicare benefits that are specific to the virus. But what they'll do is they'll ask for you to verify personal information like a bank account number, social security number, or Medicare number. And if you get a call like that where someone says they're a Medicare representative and they ask for this information, hang up. It's likely a scam and not Medicare calling. And of course, remember to report it to reportfraud.ftc.gov. Another common government imposter scam is relief payment messages. So people, I've mentioned this before, the FTC is getting a lot of reports of fraudulent calls, texts, and emails coming from people pretending to be the Social Security Administration, the IRS, even the census and the FDIC. And these fake government messages might say, you're approved for money, or you can get quick relief payments or get cash grants due to the coronavirus. They might also promise small business loans or send a phishing alert that a check is ready to be picked up. Again, these are all scams and none of these messages come from a government agency. Oh sorry, I skipped ahead. To a type of non-government imposter scam. So I just wanted to touch on another type of scam, which is tech support scams. So tech support scams are also common during the pandemic, particularly when people are so reliant on technology to connect with each other. Tech support scammers want you to believe that there's some sort of serious problem with your computer, like a virus, and then they want you to pay for services to address a problem that you don't have with your device. So they'll often ask you to pay by either wiring money or putting money on a gift card or a prepaid card or using a money transfer. And the reason they prefer those methods of payment is because they know those types of payments can be very challenging to reverse. So that's a red flag if that's kind of what they're asking for. And this is how these tech support scams typically play out. So a sales agent will ask to perform a diagnostic test on your computer, and then they claim they need remote access to your computer to do the test, and that's how they gain control over a consumer's computer. So in order to avoid these types of scams, here are a few tips. So if you get a call like this, hang up and call your computer support company yourself on a number that you know is legitimate. If you get a pop-up message on your screen out of the blue warning about virus or malware, don't call any phone numbers that show up on those pop-ups. Don't give up control of your computer to a third party who calls you out of the blue or who you call in response to one of these pop-ups. Don't rely on caller ID alone to figure out who's calling. Never provide financial account information to someone who calls and claims to be tech support. And don't ever give out your computer passwords to someone who calls you on the phone. Another type of scam that is common are charity scam. And of course, charity scammers follow the headlines too. So whenever there is a natural disaster or a health crisis like this, we can expect fake charities to pop up as well as fake appeals for money. So you might be seeing those on social media or crowdfunding sites or in phone calls or emails. So the FTC encourages you to do your homework when it comes to donations. And one resource that we have for that is that you can go to ftc.gov/charity, which lists some organizations that can help you research charities. And if someone wants donations in cash by gift card or by wiring money, that you should be a little skeptical. Those might be signs of a scam. Now I want to turn to identity theft, which is the #1 reported complaint to the FTC in 2020. And as the slide notes, with nearly 1.4 million reports last year. That was nearly twice as many as the agency saw in 2019. And we saw a huge spike in claims of identity theft relating to unemployment benefits. Over 405,000 of those reports in 2020 versus what we had was roughly around 23,000 in 2019. Identity theft is when someone steals your personal information and uses it fraudulently. And some of those examples are listed on the slide. Those can be opening credit card accounts, opening utility accounts, applying for a tax refund, employment, trying to get medical care. And the impacts are pretty severe. You can end up with denial of credit. Your credit scores obviously could be impacted if someone's taking out debt in your name. Denial of public benefits, you could lose employment, housing. Of course, you could be harassed by debt collectors. And of course, there's the stress and anxiety associated with it and the time it costs to recover from identity theft. So first, how do the thieves get your information? Those are in some more obvious ways, like stealing your wallet or stealing your mail or skimming your credit card number. But they also use techniques like the emails we talked about, the phishing emails, or they can get your information through hacking or a data breach, like the Equifax data breach that happened a few years back. And I want to go over some issues that might flag that possible identity theft has occurred. So you might find something strange in your credit card or bank statement, something that you don't recognize. You might get bills for something you never bought. You might stop getting bills that you typically get either to your email inbox or to your mailbox. You might see procedures that you don't recognize on your Medicare or health insurance bills or explanation of benefits. You might get phone calls from creditors asking about bills that you never took on or that you never remembering incurring any sort of debt for. You might get an unrequested change of address or account opening or account opening documents for an account that you never opened. You might get a news report that there's been a hack of an institution that your information might be stored with, like the credit reporting agency, the Equifax hack we talked about, or a bank. Or you might find new accounts that aren't yours when you check your credit report. And so I want to talk a little bit about your credit report now. So you are generally entitled to receive a copy of your credit report for free each year from each of the 3 national credit reporting agencies. And you can do that via the site www.annualcreditreport.com. In a typical year, you can only get 1 report from each provider per year. So we generally encourage consumers to request from each provider at different time points throughout the year, rather than getting all 3 at once, so that you can track your credit throughout the year. This year is a little bit different because everyone is eligible to get weekly credit reports from all 3 agencies through April 20th, 2022. So for the next year, you don't have to be as restrained about requesting them. When you do get your credit report, there are some things you should look for. Does everything look familiar to you? For example, do all the credit cards correspond to ones that you remember opening or that you use? Are the loans ones that you took out specifically? And if anything looks unusual, you should be concerned or look into it. So let's say you do notice an issue. What happens next and what should you do? Of course, the first thing to remember is to act quickly. And that means reporting it as quickly as possible to law enforcement. That'll include local law enforcement, like your local police department, or and the FBI federally. You would alert the US Postal Service. You want to let the big credit reporting agencies know and place a credit freeze. You want to let your financial institutions and your credit card companies know. And I know that all of that might seem like a lot, but we have a great resource. The FTC has a great resource called identitytheft.gov, which I'll go over in a little bit, which offers a step-by-step checklist of what to do and who to contact if you have been the victim of identity theft. I'll go over that website in a second. But first, I want to talk about a little bit, preview kind of the remedial options that you have. And one of those is a credit freeze. A credit freeze restricts access to your credit file, which makes it harder for identity thieves to open accounts in your name. Usually you'll get a PIN to use each time you want to freeze or unfreeze your account to apply for new credit. Thanks to a new federal law that was passed in 2018, there are now more robust protections for your credit. And here are some details from that law. So credit freeze Credit freezes used to occasionally involve state law fees, but now under this federal law, it's free to freeze and unfreeze your credit throughout the country. So no more fees. Now there's a child credit freeze that's available that allows you to freeze a child's credit until they're old enough to use it. And if you're active duty military, there are additional protections. There's also, thanks to this law, now there's year-long fraud alerts. So I want to talk about fraud alerts now. A fraud alert will tell any business that runs your credit that they should check with you before opening an account. Fraud alerts, before this 2018 law, the fraud alerts used to last only 90 days, but with the new law, an initial fraud alert lasts for a year, it's still free, and identity theft victims can get it extended for up to 7 years. So the new law is called the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act, but it has a pretty simple outcome. The 3 major credit reporting agencies, so Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, which we showed on the annualcreditreport.com slide, they had to set up each of them had to set up a website for consumers to request fraud alerts and credit freezes. And the FTC will link to those sites from this identitytheft.gov website that I've been referring to and will walk you through now. So as I mentioned before, this is a screenshot of identitytheft.gov, and it's meant to be a one-stop shop for handling identity theft, including the actions that I just discussed, including the credit freezes and fraud alerts. The website was designed with a focus on usability. So the language, the color scheme, the infographics were designed with the idea of making it as easy as possible for people to recover from a devastating fraud. On the homepage, the website explains how the recovery process works. And in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a link to the Spanish language version of the site. The Spanish language site is accessible directly at roboidentidad.gov. So this website has tons of resources, including personal recovery plans that correspond to whatever issue you're particularly confronting, step-by-step advice. There are pre-filled forms and letters for reporting to all of those agencies and institutions that we had talked about before. And there's also chat and phone support if you need it. So it's a really great resource. So here's a screenshot of what will happen if you're getting started with the process on the website. You get to choose, you basically answer questions about your situation, and the site is primarily designed to report identity theft, which is the first option above, but you can also get specific advice and resources to help you with other situations that are related, like if your information was exposed in the data breach, you can see that as the third option, or if you lost your wallet or something like that. And as I mentioned before, the system will create letters for you to send to credit reporting agencies, to your debt collectors, to your merchants and credit card companies to resolve the threat. And this is an example of one of those letters that are generated through the website. And it's an example of a follow-up letter to a lender where a fraudulent account was opened in the victim's name. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the identitytheft.gov logo, and that shows that the person has reported the identity theft to the FTC. And then another important feature, in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a list of enclosures that would be included in the letter, and that is a guide to the person sending it for the information that they need to send along to speed up the resolution of their claim. Now I'm going to cover just a couple of other resources with information that can help you prevent scams and identity theft before they even happen. One of those resources is consumer.gov, which has lots of information about managing your money, credit, loans, and debt, and then scams and identity theft. It's also available in English and Spanish. Another great resource is the FTC's Pass It On campaign. So protecting against scams doesn't just stop with obviously informing yourself. For people who have the time and interest in helping others, particularly older adults, the FTC has developed the Pass It On campaign. This campaign focuses on older adults And it encourages conversation about scams that affect this community. So the idea is that talking about scams will better prepare the community to recognize a scammer who contacts them, and they'll be more informed and prepared to report a scam if they become a victim. So this website is designed so that you or a member of your community can go to a community center or a senior center or other venue with a ready-made program that can help older adults talk about the different types of frauds they're experiencing and get better informed. So if you visit the website, you'll find tons of resources and materials for facilitating programs like that, or educational programs. And so those materials include everything from articles and bookmarks to videos and word game activities to, we even have 10-minute scripted PowerPoint presentations on particular types of scams. And you can use those PowerPoints as they are, or you can use your own template or change them up, whatever works for you. And on this screen, I'm showing an example of one of the articles that's available on the Pass It On site. And these articles, as you can see here in the example, are short one-pagers. They're written in plain language to help people get up to speed quickly and easily. And you can order physical copies of articles on Pass It On or any other consumer education materials available on FTC's sites through our bulk order site. So that's ftc.gov/bulk order. Critically, the materials are free. They're available in both English and Spanish, and you can order as many copies as you want, and even the shipping is free. So if you're interested in doing anything like this, please do visit the website and order whatever materials you think would be helpful. And finally, I just want to recap ways that you can stay informed that we've discussed today in the presentation today. So you can, one, keep up to date with the latest scams by signing up for the FTC's consumer alerts. So that's by going to ftc.gov/subscribe. When you or people you know encounter a scam, remember to please report it to FTC at reportfraud.ftc.gov. For daily information about pandemic-related reports, pandemic-related complaints and reports on those complaints, you can go to the Consumer Sentinel at ftc.gov/explore data. And for all of our blogs and alerts about the coronavirus specifically, you can go to ftc.gov/coronavirus. So I know if you have any questions, please, I want to open it up to questions now, but I wanted to thank you for your time and attention and interest in these important issues. So I'm gonna end the slideshow, and please feel free to reach out at my email address on that slide if you do have follow-up questions later.